Is Bernie Sanders was largely ignored in the first hour of the debate. He had an opportunity in a minute 21, I believe it was, to talk about Medicare for all. I mean, look, he is, by any measure, and even their own polling that they showed in between the things showed that he was more or less tied for second, I think, nationally. Maybe he was down a point, maybe he was up a point. I can't remember between him and Warren. He has the most aggressive Medicare for all program, and so they asked him about it in minute 21 of the debate. Here it is.
Senator, thank you, Senator. Senator Sanders, let me bring you into this conversation and ask you the question.
Indeed.
Well, I want to ask you the question this way, Senator Sanders. You describe your campaign, including your plans for Medicare for all, as a political revolution.
Yes.
President Obama explicitly said the country is, quote, less revolutionary than it is interested in improvement. The average American doesn't think we have to completely tear down the system and remake it, end quote. Is President Obama wrong?
This is the worst way they possibly could have asked this
We
question.
don't have to tear down the system, but we do have to do what the American people want. And the American people understand today that the current healthcare system is not only cruel, it is dysfunctional. Now, you tell me how we have a system in which we spend twice as much as do the people of any other country, and yet we got 87 million uninsured, underinsured. In some cases, we pay 10 times more for prescription drugs as do the people of Canada or other countries. 500,000 people go bankrupt because of medically related issues. They come down with cancer, and that's a reason to go bankrupt. Now, some of the people up here think that we should not take on the insurance industry. We should not take on the pharmaceutical industry. But you know what? If you think back to FDR, and if you think back to JFK and Harry Truman and Barack Obama, as a matter of fact, people have been talking about health care for all. Well, you know what? I think now is the time. And in the first week of my administration, we will introduce Medicare for all. Medicare for all. That means no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. That's where we got to go.
Now, I mean, the interesting thing about this is that Barack Obama has weighed in again in the 2020 election, and I think it's quite clear that he is attempting to stop, I think Bernie, and I think, frankly, Warren as well. I mean, I think there's a very good argument that Deval Patrick is in the race, largely to both inhibit Warren and Sanders from gaining a toehold, particularly in New Hampshire, maybe in other states. There's on Friday, Alex Breen's going to come in. He's written a piece about this to a certain extent, but there's a lot of, I think there's a concerted effort to stop the both of them. And I don't know what the solution is for folks on that end, but the idea that Barack Obama is taking time off from his
Netflix career,
helping people express
Netflix
themselves
career,
in the artistic form.
The guy from Virgin Airlines. I mean, whatever.
Oh,
whatever
you
he's
want to do Richard Branson joke
whatever.
as
Whatever.
well?
I don't know. Whatever he's
Parasailing with
doing.
Branson.
I mean, look.
Yes.
I am of the mind that, look. I personally, I would rather a former president not live the life of a millionaire playboy who's married. That's just my personal taste. But
You
if
like
you're
to
gonna
like one that isn't married.
No, I'm just saying that Jimmy Carter, not necessarily the greatest president, not necessarily the greatest politics, but there's a guy who is using his cachet as an ex-president to set some specific type of tone. If
Obama had gotten us card check, he could have as many private islands as he wants for all I care.
I mean, I agree with that. That's the thing, is that I don't really feel strongly about that. I also think that you put 8 years in like that, you took a lot of grief. Fine. You want to go and live that life, God bless you. But
what are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please.
Can we play that for Sam every day?
I'm willing to say thank you, please. But to come back into it, to come back into the race and put your finger, put your foot on the scales, your thumb on the scales, your toe on the scales, whatever, I don't know, whatever it is he's putting on the scales.
Well, at least it shows he really believes in something, right? That something being like failed neoliberal policies.
I gotta say, I don't even know when look, I think it's a combination, and I read the Perrine piece that's sort of interesting that like Bloomberg is the stalking horse for all of the Clintonites who have a pathological hatred of Sanders, and Duvall's a stalking horse for the Obama people that don't like Warren. And what I think is interesting is that, I mean, sure, there's an ideological opposition to both, but in both cases, it's super personal. And I think that, even in this case with Obama, sure, we already know Obama's to the right, but I think it's also that she annoyed a lot of people in the Obama universe. And it's actually the same just pettiness, basically, that you see in so many instances.
I don't doubt it. I don't think any of these people are principled enough to be actually acting upon. But I do think that to a certain extent, these personal interactions are driven in a certain way by different worldviews. And I think particularly when you have people like Obama, frankly, in my experience, for them, it is perceived as personal because it is people who are sort of bucking stuff that I think those people who are bucking stuff often tend to be, to have a different worldview. I mean, I think that Warren genuinely was a pain in the ass for the Obama administration because of her ideological perspective. I don't think that was, to the left, but I think also Bernie, to a certain extent, was considered a pain in the ass to the Clinton people because I think because ultimately, at the end of the day, because of his ideology, probably caused him to not give a shit about certain things.
Right.
And so I do think that it is petty, but I also think that pettiness sometimes is reflective of just, the reason why we don't get along is because you gross me out in some way. And the reason why you gross me out is because you don't seem to care that you're immiserating millions of people on their home ownership, or you don't seem to care that you have an opportunity to expand healthcare in a bigger way, but you're not being as ambitious because of certain personal ambitions. I mean, I think that may play into it, but.
Do you really think Obama's going to change anyone's mind about Bernie, though, at this point? Like even his framing was so ineffective to me. He's like, you want to burn down this system and create a new one. First of all, Medicare is part of the system that already exists. We're just going to give it to everyone. Second of all, like, people hate this system. The system sucks.
Well, I think
I'm talking about healthcare specifically.
Specifically, I think just the fact that they used Obama in the framing of that question answers your question. It may not change people's disposition about Bernie, but it certainly changes people's disposition, I think, about the viability of Medicare for all. And, we see a bunch of different polling on Medicare for all, but the fact is it's how you ask the question, and which I think gives you at least a perspective on what the challenge is for a politician who supports Medicare for all, because they're going to go in and have to argue with the American public, and they're going to be arguing against hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be aligned against it. And so the fact that they didn't have to cite Barack Obama in that question, but the fact that they did, I think, shows the efficacy, at least the perception that if Barack Obama says something, and he's wildly popular with Democrats, I mean, I don't know what his numbers are, 80% or something.
I think that what he said, just to piggyback on what you're saying, though, is, I mean, Bernie just flat out, like, we're not talking about destroying the system.
Well, Bernie's answer I thought was great because he basically didn't even argue with Obama. He said, yes, I'm totally with Obama. And then he shifted what Obama said.
Exactly the play he should make.
Exactly.
And I think on top of that, the advantage that Medicare for All and Bernie have in dealing with Obama is, first, that's the right strategy. And secondly, there's other clips of Obama saying something different about Medicare for all, specifically, namely that it's a good idea. So,
right, and he said that months ago.
And I actually think there's something Bernie's actually really advantaged that, because I think that he is, and Eric Levitz, I think, got to some of this in a piece he wrote recently, that Bernie is very effective at I think, speaking to a split in people, which is that, of course, there's a huge amount of disgust at banks and insurance companies and how the economic system works. And I think there is also a craving for moderation and reform and a sense of continuity. And I think when Bernie kind of hits the latter point sort of thematically and the former point substantively, it does well. And that's why, he dealt with Obama perfectly. Like, I agree with Barack. Like, America's awesome, and we don't want to get rid of apple pie and baseball. I just want everybody to have health care.
I mean, that's why
Beautiful.
they called it Medicare for All, right? Because people already know what Medicare is and they like it.
Absolutely.
I think that works pretty well. And I also think what I like about Obama is that Obama is so opportunistic himself, because I have no doubt. I mean, there's people that I really do question whether or not, like, a Hillary Clinton will endorse Bernie Sanders, to be honest. But I have no doubt that Barack Obama will endorse and campaign with anyone who's the nominee. And if it's Bernie, he'll know exactly how to track back to, like, this is what I've been talking about.
Exactly. Yes, that's true. Without a doubt. I just find it annoying that he is, like, my feeling is, dude, go spend, wait until the convention, show up at the convention, give a good speech. You're awesome at it. In the meantime, go to St. Bart's or, I don't know, wherever.
Go to Martinique. But
whatever.
Can I just say, too,
whatever the place you would go
do one of those water
He's a
jet
true
ski
believer.
things.
and well, no, and specifically,
He would
Jetpack.
die for tax credits.
what's annoying about him doing this, though, is the total calibration about how he responded to Trump. And yes, they did occasionally with healthcare and the Muslim ban. He would put out like a Facebook statement, which isn't typical. But over 90%, he observed normal post-presidential protocol on Trump.
Well, he was waiting for something really important
He
to
waited
come up.
till the midterms to campaign against Trump, which is typical. And, he could just as easily, if he was following that MO, just keep his mouth shut in the primary. So that is a little revealing, I think.
All right. What other clips do we have? Do we have anything else? Let's play this clip here.
Cory Booker talk about weed with Biden.
Oh, yeah. Booker talking about weed. What's this one here? All right. Let's play it. Okay.
May have been the first person up here to make it clear that Saudi Arabia not only murdered Khashoggi, but this is a brutal dictatorship which does everything it can to crush democracy, treats women as third-class citizens. And when we rethink our American foreign policy, what we have got to know is that Saudi Arabia is not a reliable ally. We have got to bring Iran and Saudi Arabia together in a room under American leadership and say we are sick and tired of us spending huge amounts of money and human resources because of your conflicts. And by the way, the same thing goes with Israel and the Palestinians. It is no longer good enough for us simply to be pro-Israel. I am pro-Israel. But we must treat the Palestinian people as well with the respect and dignity that they deserve. What is going on in Gaza right now, where youth unemployment is 70 or 80%, is unsustainable. So we need to be rethinking who our allies are around the world, work with the United Nations, and not continue to support brutal dictatorships.
Good stuff.
Strong.
I think Warren, it was interesting when she, do we have that clip of her Medicare for All response? I mean, it was interesting. I'm not quite sure I understand, just from a strategic standpoint, what she's doing, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that, like, her first tranche of Medicare for All would be great. There's no one I think I've talked to who thinks that having two pieces of legislation to do this is in any way a smart tactic or a strategy. She almost made a point of having a second vote in her answer, which I thought was it's almost like she feels compelled not to ignore the fact. I think they know. I mean, I've talked to advocates of Medicare for All who were very disappointed with not so much. I mean, had her plan been you vote once and the first transition is what she outlines here, and then the second transition kicks in automatically, it would have been, a slight variation from what Sanders' plan is. But the bottom line is that nobody that I've spoken to thinks that having 2 votes is a plan. I guess it's a plan, but it's a bad plan. And it's interesting to hear her response here because it's almost as if she sort of knows it, but can't help but mention that you have to do it. There's something sort of both like oddly sad and impressive that she has the integrity of hanging on to this plan that you can't help but think is not the right plan.
Designed to fail.
I don't know that it's designed to fail. I think it's designed to be distinct. And that is a problem, I think. It is just what it indicates to me is less a question of sincerity and more a function of
too clever by half.
It cuts against her core brand proposition, to use a Michael Brooks phrase,
Indeed.
in that it is actually not smart strategically. And that is, to the extent that she has a core brand proposition, it is that she knows how to maneuver within this world.
Right.
And this is and part of the reason why I think, frankly, that Bernie Sanders came into the race was her mess up when it came to the whole DNA test thing, which I think was indicative of maybe that she wasn't as good of a politician as some people had hoped. And I think that her being boxed in to come up with a financing plan that was that specific was also problematic. And this is another indicative of it. I mean, watch it. The plan itself that she talks about in the first tranche, I think is a good plan. That would be great if you voted on this and the first thing that happened in the first 100 days is what she's talking about. And by the end of the 4 years, you get the rest of the people on board. That would be great. But the idea that second vote's going to happen is just, I think, fantastical.
On day one, as president, I will bring down the cost of prescription drugs on things like insulin and EpiPens. That's going to save tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars for people. I'm going to defend the Affordable Care Act from the sabotage of the Trump administration. And in the first 100 days, I'm going to bring in 135 million people into Medicare for all at no cost to them, everybody under the age of 18, everybody who has a family of 4, income less than $50,000. I'm going to lower the age of Medicare to 50 and expand Medicare coverage to include vision and dental and long-term care. And then in the third year, when people have had a chance to feel it and taste it and live with it, we're going to vote and we're going to want Medicare for all.
Senator, thank you.
Yeah, after the midterms, which will probably reduce the number of Democrats.
I mean,
can I just say too, and I know I don't want to make a sincerity argument, but I mean, that is, and I mean, he is insincere, but that is Buttigieg. He's still making that kind of general argument, which is you're going to have a public option and then it's going to be so desirable that it will sort of naturally roll over. He still says that.
Well, yeah,
So
no, I think that dynamic is similar. But
yes.
what the initial offering is,
hers is way
without-
more generous.
way
more
better.
generous. And for what it's worth, tactically, even though I am 100% Medicare for all, but I'll just say tactically, if she had come out of the gate, especially because she's been, and at least in my view, she's been all over the place on this. If she came out of the gate and just said, I have the radically generous public option plan and I am not as full scale as Bernie, I think that would have worked better.
I wouldn't characterize what she's talking about as a public option. She's talking about a massive expansion of Medicaid, which would double or triple. I mean, she's talking about getting almost every single person who is not covered by insurance covered, and then providing better benefits for another 100 million people. And that is a good plan. But I think the problem is, and this is completely a political analysis, I think from a policy perspective, I think you're right. I mean, if she had come out with that, I think there would be a decent argument as to frankly, I think that if you get another 135 million people on a Medicare for All program, including the 45 million that are already there, you're talking about over, 55, 60% of the American public who are going to be on a Medicare for All. Now, you still have private health insurance in there, but I think the idea of of the second vote is silly. It's just not going to happen. I mean, even if the American public is completely on board after 2 years, when I think it takes longer than that for people to sort of appreciate it, it's just not going to happen. And it's just a very cumbersome thing. And it really, for me, it's less about her sincerity towards getting there, and it's more about just sort of I'm worried about the politics, and I'm worried about what it says in terms of her as a politician. And it was I think part of her surge was a function of people sort of getting over what they thought was an early stumble in her campaign and a recovery. And then when the pressure got turned up, there was, and I don't know that when I say her, I'm talking about her campaign, and I'm talking about the people that she's surrounded with. And I think there's probably a good argument that, that they can't quite figure it out. And that I think is problematic. It scares me in the general election. As a policy prescription, I think it's pretty good. I think it's going to be very hard to get. I think ultimately, if I had to guess, regardless of who's president, in the best case scenario, we're going to get something that's going to look like that, maybe a little bit less in the first round.
That's
but
the
to
Obama
start
argument,
there,
I'm worried
right?
about the politics.
Well, you don't
of even-
start there.
That's what I'm saying.
You don't start there.
You don't start your negotiations in the middle.
Sure.
We're suiting up for war here. It's going to be a huge, huge challenge to take on the private insurance industry. And you cannot start from anything less than the whole thing. And, I have serious doubts as to whether leaving the private insurance industry intact is going to be a good idea in the long term. I mean, Tim Faust compared it to like moving to a new house because you've got termites and then bringing the termites with you to your new house. I'm also worried about the politics of passing even the first part of her plan, because as we know, the insurance industry treats any attempts to get it under control, even the ACA, which was the most market-friendly, watered-down thing ever, as like a full-scale socialist expropriation attack. So given that fact, we need to choose somebody who not only has a good plan, but who has a good understanding of politics and power and the kind of massive outside grassroots pressure that you're going to need to get it passed.
I mean,
it could be a scenario where you have a Sanders presidency and we push like hell for it, and then the compromise is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I would start with the full enchilada because chances are you're not going to get the full enchilada. But I think that I don't know if there's any real question that if Elizabeth Warren is president, that Bernie Sanders would say I'm just going to sit this one out because I'm not president. I'm not going to push for it. I mean, I think to the extent that there's, that's why I say we'll know at least after Iowa and New Hampshire if the theory that Sanders is operating under is actually in effect, which is that they've been able to mobilize people who don't show up in the way that we poll. But I think analyzing it on its own terms, I'm not sure what the value of splitting the difference is that way. And I think you're right, Michael. Had she started out as this is not a sort of like a semi-retreat, but rather this is as far as I'm going to go, and I'm going to go this way. On some level, it's sort of like analogous, and I don't have the issues that other people have with this, where they're saying I'm a capitalist to my bones because, in the same way that I forgive Bernie Sanders for not saying, well, F Barack Obama, he's full of shit. I mean, that would be a dumb thing to say politically. I think that if I was to inject Bernie Sanders with truth serum and put him in a room and say, no one's going to hear your answer, what's your response?
All right, he's an idiot.
Right, of course. This is the problem I had with this guy. But he knows,
opportunity.
He knows that This is not about him, presenting himself as someone who's going to say the exact true thing that's in his heart. The idea is, at the end of the day, he wants to get as much material benefit for as many people as possible. And if that means that he doesn't get up there and say, Barack Obama is the world's greatest devil and he's full of shit, then he will being able to do it. And I thought that was one of the most impressive things about that answer, frankly, was that he showed yeah, you're right, Barack Obama. And he basically jujitsu'd Obama into arguing for what he was arguing for. And I think to a certain extent, I think there's a little bit of that with Warren, but she's not showing that political acumen insofar as that, if you painted yourself into a corner about the funding for Medicare for all, you continue to say it's about cost. I don't care. I think you need to be able to do that.
And those are the two poles that are frustrating about her on a political, she could have either, we talked about it, come out with this plan from day one and said it is what it is. I think it's also analogous to student debt. I support Bernie's approach, but you have that argument, get rid of all of it, or you have a very progressive approach to it. Or she could have just said, I'm a co-signer of Bernie's bill. I support it 100%. And as with everything else, I'm the one you should trust to implement it strategically.
I'm going to be able to do it.
That's it.
I'm going to be able to execute it.
Well,
But the biggest fear that I have at this point is that we look at the numbers, and it depends on what poll you look at. But if you start adding up Buttigieg and Biden, they start getting into higher numbers than you get when you get Warren and Sanders. And if you start looking at where is all the efforts coming to suppress candidates. There's no, Dennis Kucinich is not coming out of retirement to take out Pete Buttigieg. But we are seeing Deval Patrick and we're seeing Mike Bloomberg. And maybe they genuinely are coming in because they think I've got a 100% chance to win. Or maybe they're coming in going I have a 100% chance to influence the outcome of this race. It may involve me. It may not involve me. So I think that, as people who want progressive outcomes, we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. But speaking of which,